Oh, there he is, the man, the myth, the legend. From Rivals and Inside Nebraska, we welcome in Tim Verghese. Tim, good morning, man. What's up, buddy?
Good morning. Not too much. Just prepping for this weekend.
Yeah, you're drinking through a fire hose, right? I mean, a huge weekend. Nebraska has dubbed it their elite recruiting weekend, right on the heels of camp opening. And I mean, get right to it. We'll start with the biggest of a lot of big fish. David Sanders Jr. down to just two schools, I think, visits with Nebraska and Tennessee. Nebraska bats first.
Yeah. Kind of had an inkling these weeks coming into it. Just kind of when we got word he was planning to make visits, and just the wording we were hearing kind of felt like, hey, Nebraska's probably in line to get one of these. We just needed the official confirmation, official word, and sure enough, we got it yesterday that hey, he's coming. So, Damon, I mean, you saw the kid at Caleb's official visit, and you have a good understanding of kind of what this kid is. I'm very interested to see what Nebraska does this weekend, because I don't think, I think people have made this out to be like, Nebraska needs to get their NIL funds. They're trying out. This isn't a bidding war.
That's not it.
Nope.
You know what? And to your credit, you've said that from the jump, and you've been spot on the whole time. It's not
This
an
isn't,
NIL.
yeah, right. And this is about development. This is about situation, and this is working for what makes sense for you, and because he's got kind of got the long road approach here. So I'm very curious to see kind of how Nebraska does in that department. They've done a really good job to this point. I think this weekend having Dylan Raiola around could prove to be big. Just having him in just in his ear the entire weekend, going, hey,
Picking him up from the airport. How about that?
Yep. Going all in. That's it. It's impressive peer recruiting effort. But yeah, I'm curious to see kind of how this weekend goes for him. Obviously a massive development that Nebraska's in here. I put it on our board, but the way I've kind of worded this the whole time has been like, I'm not giving Nebraska a realistic chance until they get him on campus multiple times. They're doing that now, so I'm giving them a realistic chance.
I was reading all the write-ups, and on a couple, this is probably, I don't know, maybe around the first of the month, I just went through all the excerpts of what he had said about the last four schools, right? It was Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Nebraska. And immediately I said, Tennessee's the dark horse, because he talked about, and I was joking with Verz. I like Criminal Minds, and I wanted to go to school to be a profiler. So I like understanding people. And I got the sense once he said he got a chance to be himself and kind of blend in Knoxville, I was like, oh, shoot, like that's Tennessee's going to be in the hunt. I read the blurb about Nebraska, but I understood that one clearly. And I said right away, not going to be an Ohio State guy. I felt like Georgia was ahead of Ohio State if I had to rank them at the time, just because how he described the relationship wasn't what he was after. It wasn't about them cranking out X amount of players in some sort of factory. For him, it was about relationships. And so I immediately excluded Ohio State. And with Georgia, they've got his buddy. So I was like, okay, I could see them making a play, but he doesn't strike me as the type of guy to follow his friends either. It makes sense in my head. What about yours, that it's come down to Nebraska and Tennessee?
Yeah, I think so. I think the way this is kind of trickled down is kind of, it does make sense that Nebraska's here now and the other two aren't necessarily here. I think that makes a ton of sense right now, but I do also believe, I don't necessarily think you can count out either of those other two programs
I know it.
just yet.
I know it.
But I do believe, I think you can safely say at this point Nebraska has a leg up on Ohio State and Georgia kind of going into this final stretch of this recruitment.
Tim, what does the sell become like when they get the kid on campus? And there's a lot of other guys on campus, and I want to kind of pick your brain about some of the other visitors this week of what you think their possibility of coming to Nebraska is. But how does Nebraska differentiate themselves from everybody else? What do they tell the kid that's unique about them, that makes it different? Are they still selling the vision of building?
I think the vision of building, I think the vision of development, I think the staff kind of wants to be able to point to their track record of development and their ability to manage David's like health and body the best way possible. I think that's big here. Like this is a kid that, I think he's still sitting around 265, 270-ish. Like he's still slim, and that's on purpose. Like he wants to be like, he's pretty much told coach, we're managing my frame this way right now. Once I get to the college level, you can pack the pounds on, which is a very mature thing for a kid of that age. And again, clearly shows he's got a long-term approach to this whole recruitment. I think being able to point to Nebraska and go like, hey, Nebraska's going to pitch them on the nutrition program, on the strength and conditioning program. Like, we're going to get you up to the weight you need in the most healthy way possible and in the best way possible. We're going to help you take care of your body like every step along the way. And every program can pitch that, but Nebraska prides themselves on that. And I think that's going to shine through.
That's incredible insight. Hopefully people that are missing this live, I'm going to pump them to go back and listen, because in retrospect, as I look at what drew the most interest from their interaction, if it wasn't the player panel, which was fantastic with Canuck and Vincent Carroll Jackson and James Williams, it was the amount of questions that they asked to Coach Campbell and his staff, and Kristen Coggins, by he I mean David Sanders Jr., about the caloric intake, the nutrition, how to fuel the body, the Dex bone scans to see how much weight folks could carry. I bet you his dad probably asked 4 or 5 questions during that nutrition and weightlifting like demonstration part of the visit. So the more I hear you say that out loud, that might be an undersold piece. Because, Tim, I've said all along, if Nebraska could find a way to take Kristen and Corey Campbell on recruiting visits, they should. Because it's hard not to be all in on how connected they are through development.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Damon, I was going to flip this on you like a little bit. Like, you were on the visit. You were on the visit with him. Kind of. What do you think is the key here? Like, what's left for Nebraska to kind of show him?
So I think for him, it's 3 things. Number one, it's the family unit structure. He's got younger sisters. He's very diverse, right? They don't talk about football and sports a ton at like the dinner table around the house. Like, it's not that nobody wants to hear that. It's just not that's not what ties them together. The connectedness of the family is what ties them together. Number 2, I do think it's the development. Like, where can you take me that I'm not already at, where you're going to invest in me as a whole person? Like, that's the other thing. And then the actual literal physical development part, I think, are the 3 things that Nebraska can really strive for, because I think at the end of the day, he's kind of his own guy. He was quiet. He was very fun, good-natured. I could see him needing a particular kind of environment to thrive in, because I think he's different than most people that look like him.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that development piece is I think ultimately the key here. I'm curious to see kind of what Nebraska does in that department this week, and like kind of what they pitch him on, because of what they've done so far with this group and what they can look back on in terms of track record. O-line isn't really as up there as some other positions, but I think they have a vision they're trying to sell here. And I think, again, having Dylan here is so important.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I watched.
It's quite a different world.
I watched Donnie Raiola with him one-on-one during our cooking stuff and taking him off to the side. And I think to watch Donnie's wife and the kids, she was kind of like this great nanny with the support staff, and all the kids were together. It was almost like breaking bread together. There was like this aha moment. Then I watched he and Donnie talk, and I text Dom immediately, Donnie's brother, obviously, and I said, his ability to just talk to people one-on-one is incredible. Like, I was captivated. I was totally eavesdropping. He knew I'm staring him right in his face, but I'm like listening, and I'm like, this is incredible, because nobody ever gets to see that side of his personality. But when you watch that offensive line work and talk, and Ben Scott alluded to it in Indy, that is one cohesive, well-led group. What they produce is what they produce on the field, but you can't knock the chemistry and the connectedness that they have as a unit.
Yeah, no doubt. And like I think especially, you're starting to see that, pop up on the recruiting trail. Like obviously being in this recruitment, being in the U2 recruitment, like where you're seeing like, hey, this guy knows his stuff. This guy's really personable and he brings together like a unit. Like again, talking to recruits, like that was one thing that did continue to pop up for them when they stopped through Nebraska and saw players interact. Like, they felt the whole group was close, but they were especially like, you can't tell which offensive lineman is a senior and which one's a freshman. Like they all kind of move together as one cohesive unit. Like you said, like there's no age discrimination. There's no like, oh, you're a freshman, you got to pick up for the seniors. There's none of that in that room.
So of the other guys coming in, I mean, there's other positions that are needs. There's a lot of guys in. Who do you think Nebraska has the best chance maybe to get a silent commitment or a full-blown commitment from this week?
I think there's a couple 2026s you could keep an eye on, but I think in 2025, I'd have a close eye on Oregon commit Isaiah Mosey coming back into town. Just off the heels of
his dad being there helps, right?
Yep. Yep. I was going to say, just off the heels, obviously, of his dad, on staff now, him coming back to campus is notable. He's visited Nebraska more than any other school in his recruitment thus far, I believe. I think Missouri's probably close, but I think it is Nebraska at this point. And Nebraska kind of going all in here. We kind of got word this month too, kind of on the NIL side of things. They're a little more competitive with Oregon now. And having dad on staff helps. I think they're going to pitch, hey, proximity to home, like path to playing time is a little easier here than it is at Oregon. That being said, nothing's going to be handed to you here, but Oregon's got 4 wide receiver commits and they're after a couple more this cycle. They've already got a pretty deep room. Like Nebraska's got 2 guys at the top right now, but behind that it's kind of open. And those 2 guys are transfers that are probably gone after a year or 2 anyway. So you've kind of got a path here to come in and contribute. And I think that pitch is being heard. So I keep a close eye on him. And then looking ahead to 26, I think the in-state, I think a safe bet is, I think that first 26 commit's going to come from someone in-state. I think Isaac Jensen's a good candidate to keep an eye on. I think Jace Reynolds out of Elkhorn North's a good candidate to keep an eye on. Both of those have Nebraska offers. Both of them kind of raised Nebraska, following the program. So I keep an eye on those 3 names this weekend.
So you're one of the guys that has a really good pulse on Michael Terry. You and I joke, he's a very interesting personality. Late to social media, didn't have a phone till later on in the high school game. A little naive, and green with what's happened with the recruiting, and all of a sudden, it was quiet for a while. That ship was ready to sail, and then, hey, I've got 3 visits coming. By the way, Nebraska's one of them. What's the latest on MT3?
Yeah, this one shifted a lot. I think I pretty much wrote Nebraska out of it like a week ago because the latest I heard was, hey, this is coming down to Texas and Oregon. He wants to make these last 2 visits and then call it a decision. Nebraska worked relentlessly over this last week to kind of get back in that picture. I think Tuesday or Wednesday they had a phone call that kind of sealed the deal of like, okay, we're going to make another visit to Nebraska. But I think just kind of continuing to pitch him on, hey, we've wanted you the longest. Texas and us have been in this offer picture for pretty much the same amount of time, but Texas didn't make you a priority till January. We wanted you, since we offered you. We've made you a priority for as long as we've known you. And so I think Nebraska's pitching that and just being like the consistency of that relationship. And I think they're kicking the tires again on the development side of things as well. I think NIL is a little more important here than it is in the Sanders recruitment. Not to say NIL isn't important in Sanders, but I think to be in the David Sanders recruitment, you have to at least meet a certain floor number-wise, and Nebraska's done that, which is why they're still here and why a school like Clemson isn't, I think you have to be able to reach that floor and be competitive in the NIL standpoint. With Michael on the other side, I think NIL is a little more important here because I think this recruitment took the shift that it did when Oregon started throwing out the money that Oregon does. So I think Nebraska has to be a little competitive there. I think Nebraska, and I think the fact that they're getting this return visit says they're a little more competitive there. But I think ultimately, I think this week, getting him in as the last visit, I think is huge, because this is a kid that, I think Damon, you and I have talked about this. Like, he's a little impressionable. Like, comes off.
He's the one whose personality least lends me to be secure about. You know what I mean? He's kind of all over the place with his thoughts, and he's green in this. So I'm like, even if he told me something on next Tuesday, I'd probably wait a while before I was like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Like whatever intel I put out.
He's a total wild card.
Right. Yeah. Whatever intel I put out next week about like how the visit goes or how the stretch of visit goes, it could be completely different a week later. Like I very much believe, like, I mean, hell, I just said it like a week ago, just basing talking to people close to him and him himself. Like, I was like, okay, Nebraska's out of this. And now Nebraska's right back in it because, just some conversation. So I think them getting the last visit really helps, because I'd expect a decision relatively soon after these final stretch of visits are done. And I think Nebraska's able to make the best last impression. I think that could go a long way.
It's an interesting situation because you can really open this up to a bunch of things. It's like, well, we were out. Maybe that NIL number changed, and now we're back in. But the question to me is, do you want to play that game?
Yeah,
like,
that's what I was going to say. Like,
NIL.
That's what I was going to say.
Here's how you lever Nebraska. You tell them that somebody else is giving you 100 G's more, and they'll come back with 2.
Rule is just not going to play that game, man. I just
it's
can't
just such
see
a
him.
Crazy world.
I just can't see him doing that.
You have unarmed people trying to negotiate things, and they're just throwing numbers out and waiting for people to call bluffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the craziest part of all of this is, like, I think for established guys that have been doing this as long, like, so someone like David Sanders has been doing it as long as he has, that has good advisors in his corner and has like an understanding of this whole process. They know the market that's set for them. And for them, again, like, this isn't an NIL, like, they're just looking for, as long as you're competitive in this department and you can sell us on every other thing, we'll be okay. Like, as long as you can sell us on that, as long as you have meet us in the floor, money wise, we can keep having a conversation. With someone like Terry, though, I think again, being so green to this process, what I've been able to gather here is basically and you think about the contenders that have really risen in the last few months. It's been Texas A&M, it's been Oregon. Like, Nebraska and Texas have been there. Oregon and A&M have risen. And what are Oregon and A&M like? What do they do well on the trail? They do NIL well on the trail. And so I think that's what this recruitment is somewhat turned into, is because he is so green and because a school like Oregon is now involved and they are so aggressive and they want him so badly, you wonder if you get yourself into a bidding war situation here. And I think if that happens, or Texas won't pull themselves out, but I think Nebraska, if it gets to the point where it's like they're the only thing they're really looking for is more money, I think Nebraska is going to quietly like kind of buy out of this and be like, we'll circle back later down the line. But if this isn't working out right now.
Spot on.
Hey, Tim, how many kids do you see now when you talk to them about how they're handling this that have hired advisors? Or is it still a lot of people trying to do it in-house with mom and dad or an uncle? Or are they actually out like doing it with a company?
I think a lot do it in-house, but I think the very top end, like the top 200 to 250 recruits, and then a handful of others, especially in these hotspot recruiting areas where, like in South Florida, everyone has some type of advisor because so many people have gone through that process. Houston's the exact same way. I mean, there's a bunch of characters in Houston you need to kind of know to know recruitments down in Houston, just because there are individuals that pretty much manage a bunch of different recruitments. So you have to have relationships down there to be able to even, one, get into some recruitments, but then on my end, obviously, understand what's going on in some recruitments. You have to have some of these relationships. And then I think the same thing in Dallas, same thing in St. Louis. Kansas City's kind of getting to that point, but not enough like high level recruits there just yet. But some of these hotspot areas for sure, I think you see it a lot more. But individually and for some people, it's as simple as like, oh, my uncle was recruited to play track, like to run track, or my uncle was recruited for not necessarily football, and they're like, he's giving me advice in this process. And it's like, it's not a one-to-one situation. Yeah. Like, recruiting is a lot different now than it was 10 years ago in a non-revenue making sport. Like,
Well, I was a golfer 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I got it.
How do you guys like, Tim? Why didn't you think in just a year and a half Nebraska's got it to where they can use the portal and kind of NIL as a plug and patch holes versus building the roster? I think you can look at the roster and see it. They can use the portal and NIL exactly how Coach Rule described, maybe to fill a hole or two, but it's not the end all be all. He did that in just a little amount of time.
I think the speed they've done it is impressive. I think them doing it is not super surprising because this is how you build like something that is sustainable. Like in this day and age, the way you build it is strong culture paired with all of this. Like they don't hide from NIL or the transfer portal the way other programs do, but they still maintain that like, hey, we want our guys in this building and we want our guys in this building and we want, like guys that believe in this vision and guys that, are 100% bought in, and they're getting that because of culture, and they're getting that because of, just relationships they've built. I think they do a really good job. And I think you're going to see that pop up in November or, down the line this season. They do a really good job of maintaining relationships with guys you don't even think of. Like, I think down the line this season, you're going to see, hey, Nebraska starts to string some wins together. Why are they suddenly in it with this name? Why are they suddenly in it with this name? It's because behind the scenes, they do a really good job of communicating to the point that like once players start to see results and recruits start to see results, I think you're going to see recruiting figure itself out real fast because they have so much everything else checked out. Like they've got, like you said, like NILs, like they meet the floor there. So it's like, that's not something they need to necessarily worry about because for the most part with them, it's like, we're going to sell you on everything else first. And then if it comes down to it, we'll be competitive on the NIL side of things. Don't worry about that. But we want to sell you on everything else this place has to offer.
Tim, does a 1-0 Nebraska and a 1-0 Colorado college game day visit to Lincoln still influence kids? Would they pay attention to that and say, hey, that's a big time deal. Look at the environment. Look at the atmosphere.
That's a competitive weekend for games too.
Yep. It's turning out to be like, and that's the thing. I think Nebraska's shaping out to be a big weekend, and recruits are excited to come. When I talk to guys about, hey, what games are you coming in for the season? Like, are you eyeing any games? They're always like Colorado week 2. Like we're looking forward to that one. I think guys want to see a dangerous road environment at Nebraska. Not even a dangerous, but like a true rowdy like environment at Nebraska, where Nebraska creates an atmosphere for a road opponent.
Sam, fantastic stuff as always. You never disappoint, man. I can't wait to catch up with you next week after this monster weekend.
Yes, sir. Talk next week.